Hey, good morning, everyone. And welcome to today's conversation. My name is Dr. Feriani, and I am absolutely thrilled to be chatting with Professor Eugene Sadler-Smith today about something that's really been fascinating me lately, which is the whole world of intuition in education. So let me start with a little story. I was at Zurich Airport a couple of months ago. Classic parent duty, dropping off my son for a trip. I had a few minutes to kill and wandered into one of those airport bookshops. And there it was. Here it is, actually. So, Professor Eugene's book entitled Trust Your Gut. Just sitting there, it was like waiting for me. And I grabbed it, started flipping through it. And honestly, within about 2 minutes, I was hooked. This got me really curious about how intuition actually works in the educational world. We're all about data, evidence-based decisions, etc. in education as teachers and as leaders, right? But what about those moments when your gut is telling you something? What about those times when you had to make a decision while listening to your own inner voice, and you don't have to stick to spreadsheets? So that little airport discovery brought us here today. And I could not be more excited to dive into this conversation with Professor Eugene. We are going to explore how we school leaders and educators could tap into intuitive intelligence. So now let me introduce my guest properly. Eugene Sadler-Smith is Professor of Organizational Behavior at Surrey Business School. His research interests are hubris in leadership and intuition in decision making. He has written numerous articles as well as a number of books, including The Intuitive Mind and Intuition in Business, and of course, his latest book, which we're going to talk about today, Trust Your Gut. Professor Sadler-Smith is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, Royal Society of Arts, and Academy of Social Sciences. He leads the Hubris Project at Surrey Business School, has worked with various public, private, and professional organisations, including the Scottish, Welsh, and UK governments. And his research has featured on the BBC Radio and Sky TV, and in The Guardian, The Times, and Forbes magazine. So, Eugene, welcome.
Rim, thank you for having me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and also thank you for spotting the book intuitively at Zurich Airport and for picking it up and taking it to the checkout. If you hadn't done that, we wouldn't be here today. So that's a nice piece of serendipity, isn't it?
Yeah,
And intuition and
absolutely.
serendipity coming together to build something bigger. So that's terrific, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. And I'm grateful that you have accepted as well the invitation. So I would like to start actually with a powerful quote from your book. I can't read all of it today in front of everyone, but I had to intuitively select one of your powerful quotes, and which I feel that it resonated with me. So you write in the book that intuition is like a muscle. It can be developed through the right kind of exercise. And when developed sufficiently like a muscle, it can be a source of decision-making power. Right. What can you tell us a bit more about this metaphor and how do we exercise our intuition?
All right, very good. Great quote. I remember writing that well. The reason I remember writing that and making that point is that one of the things that intuition is often associated with is the paranormal and sixth sense and magic and mystical things. And I don't disparage that view. I just don't subscribe to the magical view of intuition myself.
Mm-hmm.
I actually subscribe to a different view of intuition, which I call the muscular view,
Okay.
which means that's got a number of implications. It means that anybody can develop it. So it's not just something that's reserved for paranormals or psychics or whoever.
Okay.
Anybody can develop their intuition. And it's the muscle metaphor is quite nice because if we want to develop our physical fitness, we go to the gym
Mm.
and we get a personal trainer. and we get a personal trainer who understands the human body and how the human body works and how the human body can be developed. Similarly, to develop intuition, it's you take your mind to the gym almost,
Mm,
and through a process of practice, feedback, coaching, etc., etc., you can over time, and it does take time, this is inevitable, you can over time build your intuitive muscle power. And in a way, the idea of intuitive muscle power also relates to how intuition is defined, if you like, in the scientific literature. And essentially, intuition is about pattern recognition, I think.
mm,
And it's about building up over many years a whole repertoire of patterns in our heads. And when we meet a new situation, we match that situation to the patterns that we hold in our long-term memory, and that really speeds up decision making. So it helps fast decision making. It speeds it up because that pattern matching process helps us to not even consciously say, this is like a situation I've met in the past. I know what to do in this situation. And that's where this thing called automated expertise kicks in. There is a bit of a nuance to that, which we can come on to later. But this whole idea of intuition, if we want to define it, there are two ways to define it, I think. The simplest way to define it, and it's a definition I came up with 20 years ago, is knowing without knowing how or why you know. And
mm,
that it's a nice definition, but it's not particularly helpful scientifically. A much better scientific definition is that intuitions are our analyses that
mm,
have been frozen into habits, which give us the capacity for rapid response through recognition of patterns. So
mm,
then to come back to this point about intuition is a muscle. It's built up over the years through pattern recognition, and we can develop it through deliberate practice, getting feedback on our intuitions, and finding an intuitive coach.
mm.
A
Yeah,
little bit like a personal trainer in the gym.
yeah. I love that expression. So I'm wondering, because when we had our first conversations previously and we discussed this idea of intuition, and my interest in relationship to education is that you know that when you're a teacher in the classroom, you have to make decisions sometimes on the spot. When you're a leader, you have to take decisions not necessarily with enough data. And when you're an educator in general, most of the time you rely on your intuition or your gut instinct. But I don't hear that this word is used a lot. Do you think when you talk about this idea of the seven-step journey, would it make it easier for some educators to be able to talk about intuition, how they can develop it, etc.? I wonder what your insights are about
Yeah, so
that.
the seven step journey that you allude to there, Rim, is is basically the seven chapters of the book. Trust your gut. Um, but I think before all of that, before stepping out on a seven-step journey, I think the really crucial point, and you've hit the nail on the head in your question there, is actually being open to intuition and accepting it as almost as a valid form of data. So being open to it, acknowledging it that it exists, acknowledging that it's very powerful, but it's also very perilous. And there are some situations in which it can be used successfully. There are other situations in which it cannot be used. But I think the first step for a leader, a teacher, anybody is to actually open up and actually accept the fact that you have intuitions inevitably. I've never met anybody who doesn't have intuition. But the problem with having it is sometimes we don't know what to do with it, and especially if we think of it in a magical way, that can kind of cloud our judgment a little bit. But I think everybody has it. I've never met anyone who doesn't have intuition.
Mhm,
I think it happens automatically.
mhm,
And the first step on this journey towards intuitive intelligence is actually acknowledging the fact that you have intuition, and it might be trying to tell you something. Therefore, you need to be able to interpret what it's telling you. Now, to go back to your point about education and educational leaders and teachers having to make decisions quickly in time pressured situations, under massive uncertainty and ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
That's not uncommon. And you find that in firefighting, you find it in nursing, you find it in medicine, you find it in law, you find it in policing, and you find it in management. And management is interesting because if we go back 20 years, I first wrote about this in 2004, long, long time ago. But back then, 2 decades ago in management, intuition was almost a little bit of a dirty word.
Mm.
So if as a manager you admitted to intuition, it was almost like a sign of weakness. Now, the thing that's happened in management over the past 2 decades is that intuition really has entered the mainstream. There have been loads of brilliant researchers and scientists looking at it in management and in psychology, from where we get a lot of our theories. But a lot of brilliant research has gone on in management, which has really moved it center stage in managerial decision theory. Now, I don't know about education because it's not my area at all, but I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if education is kind of almost poised for a similar transition
Mm-hmm.
where teachers and educational leaders begin to admit that this thing intuition exists, and if it exists and it can exert a powerful influence over our decisions, then we need to understand it. We need to understand the science behind it. We need to admit to having it, and we need to know what to do with it when we do experience it. So I think maybe there are lots of quite nice, interesting parallels between business management, which is my area, and your
Mm.
area, which is education, teaching, and educational leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we are here today, is that because we found that there is such a lovely connection between these two fields. And I'm quite interested in the fact that you said there was that switch as well in the management field and the business. So I wonder whether there is something similar that could happen in the education world or different as well. Um, the example that you've used about the firefighters is one that attracted me a lot because it was quite visual. Because as I was reading about it, I was imagining these firefighters who are similar to the educators, where they have high stakes decisions. They have to think on the spot. I know that sometimes it's life or death decisions, firefighters or doctors, like you said. But we go through these crises in the classroom disruption. We have, for example, parent confrontations, etc. So, what does the firefighter example tell us about developing this kind of educational intuition?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the firefighter thing is interesting because some of the best work on intuition, in understanding the science behind intuition, was carried out by a psychologist, an American psychologist called Gary Klein, who
Mm-hmm.
wrote a book called Intuition at Work, or The Power of Intuition. It has two different titles in the UK and the US. And Gary Klein's foundational research that really gave us the bedrock almost for modern intuition research was carried out with firefighters. And Gary Klein was a qualitative researcher, and he did interviews with experienced firefighters, about 30 of them, really in-depth forensic interviews, because he was interested in how firefighters take decisions. And one of the most amazing things that he found in his research when he talked to these experienced firefighters was that they said, "We don't take decisions. We
Okay.
don't, we don't, because the classic idea of decision theory is that you come up with a list of options, or a number of alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
You do the pros and the cons, the strengths and the weaknesses, you weigh it all up. Well, of course, in firefighting, and I guess in the classroom, that's not possible, is it? You
Mm-hmm.
can't, a team of firefighters turning up to a fire can't go into a huddle and decide, okay, what are the courses of action? What are the pros and cons? So
Yeah.
Gary Klein found that actually firefighters said, we don't take decisions. What happens to us what happens with an experienced firefighter is a response comes into mind
Okay.
based on pattern recognition of the situation. And what they do is they run what he called a mental simulation. So this idea comes to them automatically. This is what we should do in this situation. They then do a mental simulation. It's almost like fast forwarding a DVD in the head. Will this work? If their mental simulation tells them that it will work, They go for it, they do it. And that takes seconds, doesn't take any time at all. If their mental simulation says, no, hang on a minute, that might not work, then they go to the next best option. But it's not as though it's a whole range of options. It's one option, mentally simulate. Will it work? Yes, do it. If no, go to the next best option in that way. So, and one of the best examples that Gary Klein has written about in his wonderful work is an experienced firefighter with a team who turned up to a burning building, and they
Mm,
go in and they hit the flames with a jet of high velocity jet of water. Nothing happens, which is odd.
mm-hmm,
And then the other thing that the firefighter notices, that this might sound weird, but the fire was unusually hot and the fire was unusually quiet. So what that did with this experienced firefighter is it set off alarm bells in his head. Hang on, why isn't this responding to a jet of high velocity cold water?
mm-hmm,
Why is this fire so hot? And why is this fire so quiet? And that set off his alarm bell. And he said to the team, let's get out of here, evacuate. They evacuate the building.
mm-hmm,
And seconds later, the floor that they were standing on collapsed because the fire wasn't in the room around them. The base, the core of the fire was actually in the basement beneath them. It's called the basement fire incident. It's really well known in intuition research. And if his intuition hadn't have kicked in and evacuated them, the floor would have collapsed into the fire which was beneath them, and they would have all perished. So that for me is one of the nicest examples of an experienced firefighter's intuition kicking in that high pressured situation. So it's high pressured, it's life or death, it's uncertain, it's ambiguous, but something just went off in his head. It's almost like an alarm system
mm,
that sounded. There's something not right about this situation. Let's get out of here, and it worked. And then
mm-hmm.
I think, we're talking about education, but
Yeah.
you find similar thing. I've done some in-depth research with police officers. I've done in-depth research with managers. Um, I've not done in-depth research with teachers, but you're working in that area now, and you find a similar phenomenon that experienced decision makers
Mm,
in situations like that can somehow just detect, they know without knowing how or why they know that something isn't quite right with a situation. And that then prompts them to think, okay, let's get out of here, let's do this, let's act in this way. So
mm,
that's the firefighter example. I describe it in more detail in the book, but
yeah.
it's well documented in the literature, and it's one of the nicest examples of intuition in action.
Yeah. No, it is indeed a powerful example, and I quite enjoyed reading about it, but at the same time, it resonated with me when I had to reflect back and contemplate a number of times where, having been in education for the past 20 years, where I had to take decisions either on the spot and then, or had to trust my gut and then come back to that and say, actually, it didn't take me long to take that decision, but it was the right decision, and I do not regret it. And if I had to sit down and explain it or analyze it or use a kind of some sort of a rational, thinking in that moment, it would not have worked. But then it happened and it took place. I'm thinking, right, so there are moments in life where you can trust your guts and make those big decisions, either even, professionally or even personally. So it's fascinating. Um, I wonder if we can also explore this connection between intuitive intelligence in relationship to the age of AI. So one of your chapters that really attracted me talks about how intuition adds value in the age of artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
And it's very relevant to educational readers right now because it's quite a hot topic.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, we are surrounded all the time by data, test scores, behavioral tracking systems, predictive models for student success, etc. But I can see, and I can, talking to colleagues, etc., and then the experience that I have from various international schools or schools in the UK, that many of the most important educational decisions also seem to require something more than data alone.
Mm.
So when should we trust our gut feeling um, in general? And do you think that we need it in the age of AI?
Yeah. There's two questions there. So in general and in AI. So it's a fascinating question, and you've kind of alluded to the answer to the question, the answer in your questioning, because so we talk about intuition and analysis as though they're opposites.
Mm.
And the mistake that we often make with any things that are opposites is we think of it as either A or B. We think of it as either intuition or analysis, and it's got to be one or the other. But actually, that's not how decision making works. It's
Mm.
both A and B. In other words, it's both intuition and analysis. So Jeff Bezos, again, quotes in the book, the stories in the book where the quote comes from. Jeff Bezos said that if you can make a decision with data and analysis, you should do so.
Okay.
But then he said, it turns out in life that your most important decisions have to be taken under conditions of uncertainty, where there's a shortage of data, where there's a shortage of intuition, there's a shortage of information, and it's in those situations where your intuition has to come to the fore. So this whole idea of it's both intuition and analysis. And if you can make a decision with analysis, you should do so. If you can make a decision with intuition in situations of uncertainty, you should do so. So that brings us to the point about intuition in general. When does it work and when does it not work? Intuition doesn't work well with data. It doesn't work well with numbers. It's got a bit of a blind spot in terms of numbers. So if you think of intuition as a kind of a sensing superpower, then
Okay.
its kryptonite is numbers. It doesn't do numbers. It doesn't do quantities. But that's fine because nature's been brilliant to us because it's given us two minds in one brain.
Mm.
And it's given us an analytical mind that can help us to do the numbers. Of course, we don't need our analytical mind to do the numbers anymore because we've got machines that can do it. In fact, we've had machines for 3,000 years that can help us to do numbers, starting out with the abacus, in ancient Babylon, then slide rules, calculators. Now we've got computers and AI. So the machines, we've outsourced our number problems to
Mm.
machines. However, our analytical mind is good at solving. It's good at reasoning. It's good at rationalizing. But then sitting alongside that is this intuitive mind, and its superpower is sensing. So in a way, what we've got in our two minds in one brain, we've got an analytical mind, which is our reasoning system. And sitting alongside that, we've got our intuitive mind, which is our sensing system. And the reasoning system works well in situations where there's data, we know the facts and figures, we can talk through the rationale and the arguments. On the other hand, our sensing system, our intuitive mind, is evolved to work in and is adapted to situations of uncertainty. And if you think about life in general, personal life, professional life, and certainty and uncertainty, well, if anyone lives in a certain world, I'd like to meet them because the only
Me too.
constant, the only constant is change. The only constant is uncertainty. So we are bombarded every day with uncertainty, with lack of data, with situations that are ambiguous. And that's where the intuitive mind comes into its own. It's this sensing system. So I think, in general, when should we use it or when does it work well? It works well in situations where we have to sense, which are uncertain and ambiguous. However, there's
Mm.
always a however with this. It's not always right. It can get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill Gates was asked about does he trust his intuition? And he said, yep, I do trust my intuition. But he also said, I know that it sometimes can be wrong and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can be right. And he said he knows that his intuition is right more times than it is wrong. So his batting average is in favor of intuition. So he trusts his intuition because he knows it gets it right more than it gets it wrong. However, there has to be that acknowledgement that intuition is not perfect. It's a
Mm.
fallible system. And this brings us to the point, I think, again, back to this idea about practice and intuitive muscle power. And it takes time. And I'm firmly convinced that you get better at it.
Mm.
I used to be, when I was a young manager, before I became an academic, I worked in industry. And in one of my performance appraisals, my my manager said to me, "You'll never get on in this business because you're far too analytical. You
Okay.
need to trust your gut a bit more. You need to go with your intuition." Now, back then, probably in my late 20s, maybe, I can't remember, I just didn't understand what he meant. It went over my head in one ear and out of the other. But now I understand
Mm.
what he meant by that. And becoming intuitively intelligent for me, which I think I think I've become more intuitively intelligent,
Mm.
has been a lifelong journey. And
Mm.
it's not an end state. You just begin. It's something that's
Continuous.
continuous. It's part of lifelong learning in a way.
Mm.
So this important idea about, yeah, it works in some situations, it doesn't work in others. It takes a long time to develop it. So that's a long answer to the first part of your question, Rim. And then the second part of your question was, um, how does intuition work in relation to AI?
Yeah.
Well, then we need to ask ourselves, okay, well, what can AI do? And what can intuition do? What can intuition do that AI can't do? Now, this is a bit of a hostage to fortune, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, if you say one day that AI can't do X, then they'll come along the next day and say they will have cracked it and artificial intelligence will be able to do it. But I'll go out on a limb here
Yeah.
and, um, make a few provocative statements. I don't think AI is good at emotional intelligence. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think AI is good at social relationships. I don't think AI is good at empathy. I don't think AI is good at strategic foresight and visioning, reading the road ahead. I don't think AI is good at creativity and innovation. People won't like that, but I'm willing to argue the toss. I don't think AI is good at ethical judgment, and I don't think AI is best suited in time pressured and data poor situations. So all of that long list of situations where AI um, is found lacking, I think those are the situations where intuition comes into its own. For example, emotional intelligence, social relationships, and empathy. Strategic visioning, reading the road ahead, intuition as
Mm.
your compass when you
Yeah.
move into territories where there is no map. Strategic foresight, visioning, creativity, creative intuition. If you look back through the history of science and technology, many of the most important inventions and discovery of the 20th century, like relativity, like quantum mechanics, you name it, intuition played a really important role. And I'm not sure that AI could have come up with special relativity or quantum mechanics in the same way that human intuition did. Ethical
Mm.
judgment, moral judgment, we wouldn't outsource that to a machine. We would leave that to our ethical intuition. So I think I think we're in a good place in the sense
Mm.
that we've got AI and it's brilliant,
Mm.
and it's revolutionizing the workplace. But also sitting alongside that, we've got human intuition, and I think the time is right now in management and in education
Mm-hmm.
for people to recognize the power that intuition has and use it alongside of AI. So it's not either human intuition or AI. It is both human intuition and AI. And
Mm-hmm.
combining the two together to leverage is the best results you want to get the optimum outcome.
That's wonderful. I mean, yeah, you explained it quite well in terms of we don't have to think about it either or and get rid of that mindset, but rather how do we combine things together? How do we make things to go hand in hand or in parallel? How we get AI to get it supported with our intuitive intelligence. I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and in fact, I'm hoping that we're going to continue these conversations because when we've met for the first time and I intuitively contacted you, I felt that there would be such a lovely a kind of get together between education and your business field as well, and your expertise in there, and how can we as educators and leaders kind of tap into this intelligence which is there. And like you said, you haven't met somebody who hasn't used their intuition. I firmly believe that we as educators, we use it as well, and even our students. But perhaps what kind of intuitive intelligence we want to develop, what kind of muscle we want to exercise a little bit more. And I think there's a lot of more exciting conversations that we can have together, Eugene. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think it's important to cross-fertilize between different areas. So,
Mm,
for example, in management, we've learned a lot about intuition from first responders, emergency response, like police, firefighters. Um, I think we've learned a lot from intuition in medicine, but equally, I think it's two-way traffic. I think we've learned a lot from them, and maybe hopefully they've learned something from us as well. And I
mm,
think equally, I think intuition in education is a little bit of a greenfield site in the sense that it's kind of almost unexplored territory. Having said that, somebody called Guy Claxton in the UK, who I know very well, did some brilliant work some years ago on uh, intuition in education. He wrote a book called The Intuitive Practitioner, I think. So there has been some really good work on intuition in education. But I think now the time is right because AI is kind of catalyzing things and making people think about what humans can do. I think perhaps the time is right now for uh, intuition in education to be taken more seriously and treat and researched and understood and worked with more systematically. And I think we in business could probably learn a lot from the way in which teachers use their intuition in their time pressured situations in the classrooms, how
yeah.
educational leaders use their intuition in setting strategic direction for a school and so on. So I think there's huge opportunities for cross-fertilization between management and educational leadership and teaching.
Wonderful. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this incredible topic. Right. So here is the book, Trust Your Guts. I can highly recommend it if you want to know a little bit more about intuitive intelligence. Um, Eugene, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. And I'm really looking forward that today is just the beginning, and then we'll continue exploring this topic together.
It's been a great pleasure, Rim. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation tremendously. And yeah, I look forward to more conversations and finding out how intuitive intelligence in education develops under your uh, leadership.
Thank you.